The South will rise again. No, this isn't Confederate American rhetoric. I'm talking about the sport of rugby union and the Southern Hemisphere. We had crucial North versus South matchups on the weekend, and it was a clean sweep for the Southern Hemisphere teams. In this video, I'm going to review those games and talk about what it means for the state of world rugby. Let's get to it, guys. Let's kick off with Australia versus England. This was in many ways the biggest boil over of the weekend. The Wallabies were pretty hapless in the Rugby Championship, never more so than in their record-breaking loss against Argentina. My goodness, that was absolute destruction, a real nadir for the Wallabies. And let's not forget, it was only last year, this time of year, that they were getting knocked out of the pool stages in the Rugby World Cup for the first time ever. We just felt like maybe Australian rugby was down for the count. This win was absolutely crucial. Now, I'm a Kiwi. I've spent my whole life rooting against the Wallabies, to be completely honest with you. However, I was happy to see them get the win. And here's why. It's not a good thing if the Lions tour next year is not competitive. And if they absolutely throttle the Wallabies, it's just not a good thing. It's not a good thing for the marketability of the game. It's not a good thing for Australia heading into hosting the Rugby World Cup in 2027. If they're a truly weakened force, they need to put up some resistance. Well, what I loved about this performance from Australia was that they won it the old-fashioned Aussie way. They fought to the end. They pulled off a brilliant try, deft handling. Their final try brought to mind Stephen Larkham, David Campese, the greats of Aussie running rugby. I loved seeing it. What does this mean for England? It means they are in a deep psychological hole. They pushed New Zealand to the limit. Arguably, they should have won that game, but a missed kick from George Ford proved fatal. This was a bigger body blow than losing to the All Blacks, who are now back to number 2 in the world. Australia has sunk as low as 10th in the world. The English should have put this game to bed, but they just couldn't do it. Yes, they have a phenomenal back row. We saw Chandler Cunningham-South get over the line, score twice. We know how good Ben Earl is. What else are they bringing to the table? Certainly not clinical finishing, and certainly not clinical defense. At times, their defense was porous. The Aussies stretched them. And look, this was a big win for running rugby, and it was a big loss for blitz defense. Yes, we are seeing signs on this tour that finally the Southern Hemisphere sides are starting to crack that vaunted Northern Hemisphere rush defense. It's not every single Northern Hemisphere team, but you're talking England, Ireland, Scotland. They all love a bit of rush D. It's been causing problems for the Southern Hemisphere teams for about a decade. We're starting to see signs that the Southerners are finding their way around that midfield blitz. I'm happy to see it. And you just start to think, boy, if the Springboks bring their A game to Twickenham, England might be going down by 10 to 20 points. Let's move on to the All Blacks versus Ireland. I'm a Kiwi rugby fan, as you know, so I made a pretty in-depth analysis of the game. You can check that out below. But what did this really mean for the balance of world power? Well, the All Blacks have now beaten the Irish twice in a row in huge fixtures, none bigger than the Rugby World Cup last year. But this game was marketed as revenge. The Irish have been stewing on that loss that was no doubt their most painful loss ever. They went into that World Cup as heavy favorites. That was their emotional low point of the past 100 years. I think you can say that without exaggeration. This was their chance to get one back over the Kiwis and show them, hey, we've still got the wood on you. Well, they don't. The Kiwis got up by 10 points. The Irish admittedly were off colour. They looked a bit cold. They looked like they were short of rugby. But the All Blacks are getting back to their clinical best. And they had a fourth quarter surge to put the men in green away. Listen, this was partly a really pleasing return to form for the All Blacks. Certainly underlined how their mental game has grown, how the bench impact has improved out of sight from those pretty tepid at best displays earlier this year. Hell, I'm going to even say incompetent displays from the New Zealand Impact players. They've come a long way since then. But to a certain extent, this was a self-inflicted Irish wound. They simply choked in the last quarter. They looked psychologically frazzled. They made uncharacteristic, unforced errors. So what does this mean? I think the Irish are going to bounce back. They're a great side, a truly great side. They're going to be in the mix of the top 3 in the world for years to come. That's what I predict. However, you do just start to think that maybe the pinnacle for this team might have been their win over New Zealand. In New Zealand, that Steinlager series in 2022, 2-1. They beat the All Blacks. Couldn't back up that form in the World Cup. Now there are a few signs of decline. It's all on the Irish to get back to number 1 in the world. Start beating the Southern Hemisphere teams consistently again. They got their work cut out for them. Italy versus Argentina. Now, Italy is the most improved team in the Northern Hemisphere, and in my opinion, it's not even close. I watched the Six Nations very attentively this year. I was blown away by the Italians, in particular their speed. Now, I'm not just talking about the backline speed. A lot of you know about Ioane. He is a magical player for them. He's a magician. He just makes things happen. I'm talking about their breakdown speed. They have gotten so much quicker to the breakdown, and their ruck ball has really improved. At times, the Italians had lightning fast ruck ball in the Six Nations. It helped them beat Wales, helped them draw with France, okay? So I gave them a sliver of hope going into this game, but what I learned from the Italy-Argentina game is that the Italians might be quick, but in general, the Southern Hemisphere teams play a quicker style. We're often criticized in the South for playing, popcorn rugby, super rugby. Yeah, sure, you throw the ball around, you give it a lot of air, but there's not much crunch in the forwards. Your set piece isn't really as important as it is in the North. Well, certainly the Argentinians had a good set piece against the Italians, but they just brought so much speed to the breakdown, and when they counterattacked, the Italians were grasping at air. Fairly competitive for the first half, but the Argentina players came into their own in the second half. And look, when you hit 50 against a Six Nations side, that is an emphatic win. Italy absolutely have improved. Hasn't changed my view of the Italians. But when the top Southern Hemisphere heavyweights hit good form, Italy is not in a place where they can live with them. The Springboks beat the Scots, and it wasn't pretty, 32 points to 15. I also did an analysis of that game. You can check that out below. What did I take from it? Well, what I took is that even a subpar Boks team is still good enough to beat Scotland at home. They were not at their best. They were a little bit rusty. They were coming in cold. But the Boks ultimately had the set-piece control to really hurt the Scots. And here's the crucial thing. The theme today is attack, superior attack. It was a win for attack. The Springboks scored 4 tries to 0. You can't spin that statistic. The Scots were brave. The Scots fought hard. For 20 minutes in the second half, they were actually bossing the breakdown. But they could not pull off a kill shot when they got to the Springbok 22. If you don't score tries, you do not win in 2024. It is not enough to kick penalties. What we learned from this game is that Scotland needs a bit more finishing power if they're really going to trouble the top 5 teams in the world. And as for the Springboks, they're going to move on. They're going to be battle hardened from this. They're a little bit cold. Wasn't a vintage Springbok performance, but good enough to rack up twice as many points as the opposition. And man, you know what? I think that the Boks could put in a pretty scary performance against England if they start firing on all cylinders. Let's finish off with maybe the most exciting one of all, Fiji versus Wales, the first ever win for the Fijians in Cardiff. What did I like about this game? Well, of course, I loved the running rugby, the enterprise, the attack from the Fijians. But actually, I like the fact that you saw them taking the threes. Their number 10 was willing to keep the scoreboard ticking over. There was just something a little bit more gritty and clinical about the way they were playing. They weren't overexcited. They played the percentages at times. And that's what the Fijians have needed. They've needed a bit more set-piece solidity and, frankly, just a little bit more calmness and composure. They're just an amazing attacking side. It's in their DNA. Look at the sevens. The Fijian sevens, they're a force of nature, all right? I've been to Fiji a few times. You literally see children throwing around a rugby ball everywhere you look. They grow up playing, barefoot rugby in the backyard. It's in their soul to play attacking rugby. But I'm seeing signs now that there's a little bit more game management coming into the Fijians, and that should be scary if you're a Northern Hemisphere team who's not at your best. Now, Wales were the underperformers of the Six Nations. Warren Gatland has not been able to get these boys going at all, but nevertheless, you would have picked them to win at home. Not today. Fiji gets the W, and it wasn't just attacking flair. As I said, it was smarts and game management. Now, France did roll Japan, but that's a Northern Hemisphere team. Nevertheless, they are going to pose a very stern threat to the All Blacks. I think they'll go into that game as favorites. One word, DuPont. Probably the best player on earth right now. So There were signs that he has inspired the French again after their listless Six Nations campaign. So that's going to be a big one next week. And I think all eyes are going to be on Twickenham for the Boks versus England, but perhaps even more so France versus the All Blacks. Now, I'm not going to get carried away. One weekend of positive results for the Southern Hemisphere doesn't just change the whole ecosystem of world rugby. I'm not saying that. But I am admitting that the North has gained ascendancy. Don't forget, they went into that World Cup last year with every man and his dog saying that France and Ireland were going to be there in the final. It did not happen. It was an All Blacks Springboks final. I think we're seeing in the past year that the balance of power is shifting back to the Southern Hemisphere. If these results continue, it's going to be an emphatic win for the South. I can't wait to see what happens next. Guys, I'll be back next weekend to break down those big games. Can't wait. I'll see you then. Take it easy. Bye for now.